Welcome to another edition of the Big News Roundup. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. Dozens of fed-up Democrats, including Ilhan Omar, they file articles of impeachment against Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, accusing her of instigating a brutal reign of terror throughout the entire U.S. The clock is ticking for Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as his opponents take the first legal steps required to remove him from office, and the leaders of Iran threaten to assassinate President Trump as anti-government protests intensify and the Islamic regime teeters on the brink of collapse. Also, a number of top U.S. officials gather for a high-stakes meeting to discuss our nation's potential acquisition of the strategic island of Greenland. And a popular actress from Sex and the City, I remember that TV show, blushing with embarrassment after failing to recognize the world's most popular movie star at the Golden Globes. All this and a bunch more coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin with a provocative escalation by ringleader Ilhan Omar and her Democratic pals designed to challenge the Trump administration's unparalleled efforts to safeguard our nation from criminal illegal immigrants. Claiming that the recent ICE shooting in Minneapolis was the final straw, dozens of left-leaning Dems from the U.S. House of Representatives are now cranking it up a notch and introducing articles of impeachment against Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem. Yeah, don't worry about the crime, the fraud, the corruption. Redirect and go after Noem. And speaking on behalf of the entire bunch of lefty loons at a recent press conference, a little-known congresswoman named Robin Kelly of Illinois introduced herself to the nation by accusing Noem of violating her oath of office and instigating a reign of terror from coast to coast, all before warning the secretary that there are severe consequences for her actions. The esteemed congresswoman then goes on to list several charges she and her pals are making against the Homeland Security Secretary, and among them that Noem willfully obstructed Congress by blocking lawmakers from entering DHS facilities, that she violated the public trust and used unnecessary violence, and that she inappropriately benefited from her role as Homeland Secretary by using taxpayer dollars to fund certain ICE recruitment campaigns. Additionally, the Dems claim that by labeling the recent victim of the tragic ICE shooting as a domestic terrorist, Noem is guilty of revealing her department's utter lack of restraint and oversight when it comes to the way they're handling their business. So, even if every single Democrat in Congress signed off on the impeachment charges, they basically have a snowball's chance in hell of ultimately succeeding with the GOP because the GOP is currently in charge of both the House and the Senate. But look, this whole deflection thing, I'll tell you, that's just brilliant. According to DHS, the move is just a desperate attempt at showmanship by the Dems, which is designed to provide them with a bunch of fundraising clickbait. For her part, Secretary Noem is laughing off the entire affair, saying that she's going to keep doing her job and putting the bad guys behind bars. In the meantime, Representative Ilhan Omar and nearly 100 of her radical left house cronies, they're vowing to make ICE pay for their ongoing crimes by completely defunding the agency when the bill comes due at the end of this month and Homeland Security runs out of money. They're now promising to stick together like glue and vote against any future funding for the department, with Omar taking the lead and guaranteeing that she and her pals, fellow Democrats, are going to put a stop to the Trump administration's violence and lawlessness once and for all. And odd, she made no mention of the billions in fraud. Must have been an oversight. Must have slipped her mind. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. The words of one of the most ineffective U.S. presidents in the history of presidenting, this is all a bunch of malarkey.
That's a bunch of malarkey.
Thank you, by the way, Joe Biden. Now, look, there's a thing in life called cause and effect, and here's how it all pans out. Pour a gallon of maple syrup on the kitchen floor, and a short time later, the insects will surely come a-crawling. You eat pizza for breakfast every day and ice cream for dinner, and after a short chunk of time, you may very well develop Dunlop's disease, and that's where your belly Dunlops over your belt. And same deal here. Allow illegal immigrants to set up shop in big cities all over the country in defiance of federal laws, and there's a pretty good chance that ICE agents may come to town and do their job. And that job is finding, arresting, and then deporting those particular individuals. Now, in the course of those agents performing their assigned duties, other upstanding citizens may want to plant themselves in the middle of all the action, and as a consequence of that interference, people can and sometimes do get hurt. For Democratic members of the House and the Senate, for big city knucklehead mayors and blue state governors, yeah, we get it. Chaos is your game, and it's a game you're losing in grand fashion. You're all a bunch of dullards and dimwits. Clean up your communities, or don't, and the federal government will jump in and do it for you. Probably not even charge you. Oh, yeah, if you want to make a name for yourself, but trying to impeach Kristi Noem, have at it. You'll fail miserably. And sorry to pour some salt on the wound, but the Trump administration is now and will remain in full support of the Secretary of Homeland Security. Turning our attention now to Minnesota, where the wheels of justice are just beginning to pick up steam, and local lawmakers are in the process of drawing up and filing their own articles of impeachment, and this time against crumbling Governor Tim Walz. As we mentioned on yesterday's program, state Republicans who are completely fed up with Walz's nonsense have been clamoring for an end to the governor's disastrous and fraud-laden run. And now they are taking concrete steps to turn their wish into a reality by drafting a number of specific charges against him. Right now, they've already spelled out 4 distinct and official articles of impeachment against Walz, including that he violated his oath of office by intentionally concealing and covering up evidence of fraud. Additionally, they accuse the governor of obstructing and interfering with legitimate oversight and investigations concerning that fraud, prioritizing politics over the administration of state programs, and failing to protect public funds. Outside of that, he's done a bang-up job. So, the papers were drawn up by State Representative Mike Weiner, who says he came up with the idea after thoroughly reading Minnesota's Constitution. He claims that the Democrat-led fraud in his state, at least $9 billion, that Walz says the buck stops with him, and that since the governor refuses to resign, the only way to get rid of him before his term is up is to initiate proceedings, and as soon as next month. He also argues that taxpayers are calling for Walz to be put on trial for his fraud failures, and that if Minnesota Democrats don't go along with the impeachment plan, they're entirely complicit with that fraud as well. Makes perfect sense. Experts who are watching the situation closely say that, unfortunately, the process isn't very likely to succeed, in part because it's doubtful that 2/3 of Minnesota's state Senate would vote to convict Walz as required. Nevertheless, they say it's important for Republicans to introduce the measures so they can outline the specific evidence of wrongdoing which they currently have against him. A lot of wrongdoing at that. For his part, Walz is basically doing what he always does, which seems to be a whole lot of nothing. He's taken time out of his busy day, however, to call attention to the recent resignation of the top fraud prosecutor in Minnesota, who stepped down earlier this week following an apparent disagreement with Justice Department. And so, that prosecutor, he was the first person to point out that Minnesota's staggering fraud scandal could eventually add up to more than $9 billion. Also at that time, Walz accused him of speculating without any facts whatsoever. And now that he's gone, however, the governor is blaming the Trump administration for making him leave and calling the prosecutor's exit a huge loss for his state. Go figure. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Impeachment is a complete waste of energy and resources, and if this Tim Walz simpleton had even an ounce of common sense, it'd save everybody a great deal of time and drama and simply bail out, clock out once and for all. Baby steps. Now, to his credit, step 1, he's already pulled himself out of the governor's race. He will not be running for a 3rd term in November, and that is a positive step forward. And step 2, just as easy. Simply resign. You return the keys to the governor's mansion and then collect, in disgrace, your final paycheck. Step 3, unemployment. The scandal-plagued failed government leader can fill out a few hundred pages of real easy-to-follow unemployment forms. And if he does it right, he's going to score himself several $100 a week to get by on while he searches for another state to dismantle. Step 4, reach out to the News Roundup host. Yeah, this guy for resume tips. I'm real good with resumes. And on your resume, Tim, leave out the part where your state is under investigation for $9 billion worth of fraud. Also, an unreasonable amount of illegal immigration and far too much crime and corruption. Leave it all out. Applying for a cashier job at Staples, Mr. Walz, hiring managers, they always frown on junk like that. And I'm simply trying to help. By the way, it's a bit too late for Governor Walz to say this, but he said it. The buck stops with him. And I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but I wonder if that's code for some of the $9 billion in fraud is tucked away neatly in the attic of the governor's mansion. And like we always say on this program, show us the money. All right, change things up just a bit now. Shift our focus to the deadly struggle taking place in Iran, where the Islamic regime is currently facing the biggest challenge to their power that they've ever experienced. This is huge. Now, making things worse, Iran's leaders are now pouring gasoline on the fire by making an alarming threat against President Trump. Now, according to reports, the Islamic Republic is ramping up their rhetoric against the U.S. and taking it to an extremely dangerous level by actually calling for the assassination of our commander-in-chief. The ugly threat was shown nationwide on Iranian state television by the brutal regime as they desperately try to crack down on the enormous anti-government protests which are rocking that entire country. As part of the coverage of an apparent pro-government gathering, the regime prominently displays a picture of President Trump, which was taken during the 2024 Butler rally assassination attempt. The words, "This time it will not miss the target," are written below the image and in Farsi. Critics say the provocative and antagonistic move is a blatant and direct threat against Trump by the Islamic regime. And they also say that apparently it's an attempt to discourage the president from striking their country if the deadly crackdown continues and Iran ramps up the execution of protesters. For his part, 47 is still weighing his options as the world waits on pins and needles to see what he'll decide to do next. For now, he says, he has it on good authority that the planned executions in Iran have completely stopped and that the Islamic regime is taking their foot off the pedal concerning the vicious clampdown. However, other reports indicate that Iran's cruel crackdown is not slowing down one bit, and they point to the thousands of protesting Iranians who've already been slaughtered by the regime as proof. In the meantime, the president has promised the good people of Iran that U.S. help is on the way and a military operation by American forces is still very much on the table. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Here's the way it's all panning out. And in the interest of international diplomacy, I'm going to be very delicate about this. I will refrain today from referring to Iran, its leadership, their proxies, or virtually anybody, even remotely related to the Islamic regime, as nincompoops, blockheads, or even numbskulls. I won't call them morons, dolts, or cretins. I'll be thinking about it, but I won't be saying it. At the end of the day, I'm a pretty fair-minded guy. So, Iran's capital city of Tehran, it's pretty much out of water. It's being rationed, and they may have to evacuate some residents if they haven't already. Their dollar isn't worth a nickel. It's not worth a penny. The entire economy is flatlining, and if you missed it a few months back, we sent some missiles through the air and obliterated their nuclear infrastructure. Now the country's Grand Poobah, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, they call him Big Al, is no friend to the general population in Iran, as you know, and for his country to make death threats against the most powerful man in the world, no, not your News Roundup host, the other most powerful man in the world, that guy, President Donald J. Trump. It all seems almost comical. We have nuclear bombs. Big Al has a Daisy BB gun, which, when fired appropriately from a distance of about 8 feet, can almost break the skin. A mighty dangerous weapon they've got there in Iran. Bottom line, the people of Iran are quite lovely. The leadership, however, is delusional. Never threaten the USA or our very well-regarded president. Pivoting now to breaking developments concerning President Trump's tariff policy and its impact on world trade. According to reports, China's trade surplus last year actually rose to an all-time high of nearly $1.2 trillion as the communist regime compensated for their reduced exports to us here in the U.S. by simply shipping more goods to other countries. They're kind of crafty that way. The reports say that while China's shipments to our country dropped nearly 20%, they made up for part of that lost revenue by significantly increasing their exports to Africa. Additionally, the communist regime expanded their shipments to Southeast Asia, also Latin America, and the European Union as well. Experts say China's increased trade surplus is due in part to a large international appetite for their computer chips, also electronic devices, and the materials needed to make them. They also point to a sizable increase in China's car exports as well. Now, a couple of additional headlines we're also keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first, President Trump is warning that beginning next month, the U.S. government plans to halt all federal payments to states that support what he calls the corrupt criminal protection centers known as sanctuary cities. Moving along in Washington, a bipartisan bill aimed at stopping the federal government from shelling out millions of dollars to dead people has just cleared its final congressional hurdle and now heading straight for the president's desk. The so-called Barf bucket measure allows a number of agencies to coordinate their files in order to stop all that ongoing fraud. And following a critical meeting at the White House, Denmark's foreign minister says that her country and the U.S. still have a number of fundamental differences concerning Trump's desire to take over Greenland. In the meantime, officials say they plan to continue holding a series of high-level talks to discuss all the possibilities. Could happen and in time. And now a quick gander at a bit of showbiz news, and we kick things off today with a tidbit from the world of TV. The Peacock Network, NBC, has just given the green light for a major reboot of their classic late 1970s detective show, The Rockford Files. They say the new version is going to put a modern spin on the adventures of ex-con private investigator played in the original series by James Garner. No word yet, though, however, on who's going to try to step into Garner's lofty shoes and take on the big leading role. Jim Rockford was the best at what he did. A world-class LA-based pretend private investigator. Every episode, season after season, was even better than the previous one, and it's one of the best TV shows ever created. However, the program kind of ran its course all those years ago. All the capers have been solved, and now it's up to Hollywood, I think, to invent maybe something new. Unless, of course, I'm being considered for the starring role in that series. In that case, it's a great idea. Let's do a new program. Turning now to music and a legendary rocker who's just found a totally unique way to announce a string of upcoming summer shows. Appearing in a short film and sitting in a diner next to both actor Sean Penn and a loaded jukebox, 74-year-old John Mellencamp now revealing he'll soon embark on a lengthy greatest hits tour that's going to take him all across the U.S. Now, I'm no big John Mellencamp fan. He used to be John Cougar and John Cougar Mellencamp. Got through a lot of name changes over the years. Not a huge fan, but I'll give him this. He is unique, original, and creative. He seems sincere, kind of hardworking, and committed to his craft. You also have to admire a guy who has a mild heart attack back in 1994. He's a young guy, just 42 years old at the time, but recovers and keeps on gigging. And even as a senior citizen, he is still playing the hits. Rock on, John Mellencamp. And in Hollywood, apparently this year's Golden Globe ceremony sparked a disturbing flashback for a popular actress, Sex and the City star Kristen Davis. She says a couple of decades back, she was walking down the red carpet to get into the award show when she made a blunder of a lifetime. Huge blunder. Says she saw her castmates hanging out and talking with an unknown stranger she assumed was an agent, but when she grabbed the man's arm to push him out the way, turned out to be none other than superstar Tom Cruise. Now, look, I could easily pick Tom Cruise out of a crowd way back when, but today it might be a bit of a chore. Our Hollywood-based News Roundup spies have hinted at the possibility of cosmetic work like Botox, possibly veneers, maybe some hair restoration and coloring, and who knows what else. And now I just got to know, hey, Tom Cruise, who actually watches this program every day, have you ever had any work done?
I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
That's mildly off-putting. That makes me feel a little uncomfortable. And now it's time to call it a wrap on the Big News Roundups. Have an awesome day today. Stay safe, and if you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button right there. With that, we're going to dim the lights, going to fade to black, and we'll see you right back here next time for another episode of the Big News Roundup.